Hello, everybody. We are pleased to be hosting our last webinar for Organic Week 2020, and we're very happy to have you all with us on this wonderful Friday. We have a wonderful guest speaker today, Maryse May from Chaws Organics, who's going to be speaking today on organics and health. And it is a topic that sometimes I think we shy away from in regards to talking about in organic, even though it's one of our core principles. And I think it's time for us to dig in on how organic does contribute to health and well-being. So just a quick bio in regards to Maryse. Maryse is a social entrepreneur, creative thinker, and perpetual optimist. Healthy diets, avoidance of chemical toxins, and environmental protection are core values that she was raised with that led for her to pursue a nutritional science degree focusing on plant-based diets at UBC, where she graduated with honors. In 2004, she traveled to Asia, and she met her life partner, Chanaka, while living in Tokyo. On a visit to his native land of Sri Lanka, she fell in love with the culture, the traditions, the food of this island country, and they soon relocated to Canada to bring these foods to North American kitchens with the creation of Chaws Organics. Maryse is a current board member of the Canada Organic Trade Association and the Quebec Fair Trade Association, and a previous board member of Fair Trade Canada. I'd like to thank you for joining today, Maryse, and I will hand it over to you.
Thank you, Tia. I'm so happy to be here and sharing this last webinar with you. It's been a great organic week, and thank you to everyone who's joined on the other webinars or in any of the campaigns. It's been a really exciting organic week for all of us. So I'm so happy to be here talking about health. It's actually not a topic that I shy away from, as any of the attendees who are among my circle of close people, friends, family can definitely attest to. I'll just give you a little bit more background about where I'm coming from in this conversation. Healthy food and healthy diets have always sort of been a part of my life. I was raised by two wonderful parents who I jokingly say, well, they were hippies, but really, you know, they were, I think, very adamant about just natural health, natural lifestyle. And they actually met at Montreal's first health food co-op, where my mother had been involved in at the time. And they really were pioneers in bringing healthy foods, natural foods into Canada. So I do appreciate everything I learned from my upbringing about the importance of choosing natural, and, you know, in the time there wasn't as much organic, but definitely organic products, and how important that is in health. Later in my life, though my parents are artists, I decided to rebel and pursue a degree in nutritional science at the University of British Columbia because I was just really fascinated with how simple choices we make through our diet can impact health. And I really enjoyed learning about biochemistry and different metabolic pathways, how vitamins work, nutrients, and all that. But one thing that really stuck with me from that experience was learning about you know, sort of the scientific method and how to conduct research in medical and health journals, which is sort of a hobby of mine. And I really I love, you know, the quest for knowledge and truth. And I think that there's a lot that we can bring to the conversation when it comes to organics and health. So I will approach this from probably a couple of different angles, and we'll welcome questions at the end. And without any further ado, let's begin. So when we talk about organics and health, first, I really think it's important to frame this conversation with just sort of a broader picture approach in looking at health. And specifically, it's important to ask ourselves these questions. What are the indicators of good health? Often when we look around, especially these days, unless anyone's been asleep all year, there's a lot of talk about health and safety and well-being. And I think that means different things, I've come to realize, for different people. So it's really important to ask ourselves, you know, what is health? Is it the avoidance of pathogens, the absence of disease or even disease symptoms, regardless of overall cellular integrity? Is it increased longevity regardless of quality of life? Or better access to medical services, health coverage, and sometimes experimental or pharmaceutical drugs or biologics? Or is good health actually more of a state of balance, where where all cellular functions, including immunity and detoxification, run at optimal capacity. Is it increased vitality, resilience, and longevity with a good quality of life? And most importantly, I think better access to foods and medicines that are as healing as they are nourishing and do not compromise the body's integrity. So those would be sort of some of the points that sum up how I approach health. And it's not to say that anything on the left-hand column is bad or wrong, but I think that taking a big picture approach to health really means looking at the whole system and the health of the entire system and the cellular integrity, so that we don't run into diseases or problems down the road based on, problems with those systems. So when defining health, often we look at modern medicine, obviously, as a guiding philosophy. But I also like to look back to more ancient systems of medicine. One that I'm very attached to is the Ayurvedic tradition, and also the lesser known tradition from Sri Lanka, which is the Hela-Vedakama. And they're very ancient systems which have been with humanity for thousands of years. And that's why I sort of trust them, because they're tried and tested. So they've kind of, the test of time has proved that they work. And our modern medical system is actually based on a foundation which is derived from those ancient systems out of South Asia. And I think it's important to recognize some of the guiding principles that they are based on when it comes to defining health. The Charaka Samhita is actually humanity's most ancient medical manuscript, and it's the foundational document in Ayurveda. And just a little passage here I'll quote from. It says, "A physician who fails to enter the body of a patient with the lamp of knowledge and understanding can never treat disease. He should first study all the factors, including environment, which influence the patient's disease, and then prescribe treatment. It is more important to prevent the occurrence of disease than to seek a cure." And going a little bit further into the Ayurvedic philosophy, the building blocks of good health in their most basic form are summed up in the Ayurvedic dosha and element theories. Many of you may be familiar with these. If you're not, I'm going to do a very quick overview, but there's so much more information available, and I really encourage you to look into these some more, because they're powerful and healing. So in these traditional systems of medicine, often in North America and in Asia and in Europe, there have been they've been founded on the concept of the elements. And obviously, we are all aware that there are, earth, fire, water, air out in the atmosphere. But how they relate in our bodies and in living systems in terms of health is really interesting. And I find it fascinating, because they're simple, easy concepts that any layperson can really get a hold of if they try. And they're powerful because they have a lot of truth, and they really do represent and symbolize a lot of really complex metabolic pathways and health conditions in a way that anyone can sort of understand. So that's why I really like them. So the 5 elements are fire, water, earth, ether, and air, which you can see over on the left. And those actually are grouped together in these subtle factors called doshas, which are sort of like the humors in ancient European medicine. Those came from Ayurveda. But I would say that there was some misunderstanding in how they were applied in Europe, which led to what I would call a lot of imbalance. So if you really look back to how they were traditionally applied in South Asia, they represent different functions in living systems that can be thrown off balance if there's an excess in any one of those. So Vata is really related to elimination. It is comprised of air and ether, so it's very light. And the season would be right now, fall, where everything is sort of drying up and dying, sort of end of life, elimination, and also the nervous system and the lungs. So what's all the organs that are hollow. Pitta is more fire and water, so it's almost like a picture like a liquid fire, and it is it's fire and water, and it also is related to transformation, so metabolism, anything that generates heat in the body, inflammation, and creativity. And Kapha is earth and water, so it's more nurturing. It is growth. It is also transformative in the way that earth has the potential to take what's decayed and really, renew it into living matter. And it's also very solid, and it would be more associated with the seasons that are wet, like winter to spring. So you can see on the right how those doshas interact in the body and the different organs. And it's much more complex than that, but I just wanted to give an overview because I really feel that those big picture foundational concepts are so important when it comes to approaching health. Health really does rely on order and equilibrium in between all of those elements, doshas, and different systems in the living being. So I just want to move my panel here, sorry. Ayurvedic philosophy really talks about this a lot, the importance of maintaining health and equilibrium in between the doshas, but many other systems of traditional and holistic medicine do as well because it's so important. And the careful balance is achieved within the body as a result of countless interdependent cellular functions, and they all act in synergy to achieve what we now know as homeostasis. When I was studying nutritional science and learning about different biochemical pathways and all those Krebs cycle and all that stuff, energy metabolism, I loved it and I found it fascinating. But I remember one time standing in front of a big, huge poster where all the metabolic pathways that we knew were all on the poster, and they were tiny and you could never memorize them all. And I remember just standing back and looking at it and going, wow, it's incredible that we as humans have discovered all of that. And at the same time, I know there are countless more that we have yet to discover. We can't possibly know everything going on inside of the cell or inside of the body. So as much as it's amazing that we try to know, there are just countless functions going on all the time, and they all depend on this synergy where they work together, and there's this incredible balance and homeostasis that is part of the natural design of life. So to maintain balance, our cells are constantly working through all those pathways I just mentioned to regulate the body's temperature, pH, nutrient levels, electrolyte levels, and all the available energy so that we can, just complete our cellular functions and live our lives. So factors such as diet, environment, and age affect this balance, and our cells must react accordingly to maintain the balance that our survival depends on. I think we take it for granted sometimes how hard our cells are always working just to maintain that pH level and temperature, but it really is incredible. So once we go into disequilibrium in any of those systems, this is actually the root of all disease. And it causes stress on our cells because they must work harder now to maintain homeostasis. And that could lead to an excess or a deficiency in key metabolites as the cells sort of work overtime to achieve that balance. And Ayurvedic theory tells us that disease is like a tree. The deeper its roots in our system, the more difficult to treat. So picture a tree, and anyone who's done any gardening or farming knows that, if you have a little seedling, it's easy to pluck out, but if you're trying to remove a large tree from your yard, it's definitely difficult. Same goes with weeds. So the bigger they get, the more difficult they are to remove, and disease is much like that. It takes root in our body in a small and subtle form through disequilibrium, and then it gets worse and worse until it becomes very difficult to treat. So many disease symptoms that will appear only after the roots have become well established. It's like, you see the sprouts coming out of the ground only after it started to grow underground. So prevention really is key. Early treatment, prevention, and just maintaining balance is so key in avoiding disease. And oftentimes disease can be completely prevented if the underlying imbalance that would have caused it is identified early on and addressed. So now I'm going to kind of switch gears and go more into the biochemical pathways and more the metabolic implications of what we've been discussing when it comes to equilibrium. But I did want to frame it with those big picture concepts because I think it's important. We live in a toxic world. It's no secret. We're surrounded by toxins in the home, outside of the home, especially from agrochemicals. There are just countless toxins, and we are amazingly still alive thanks to our resilient systems and metabolic pathways. But it's difficult to maintain equilibrium in a toxic world. Quickly here, I'm just going to show you, you see these are a lot of different nutrients that need to be used up that are useful in the detoxification pathways that we depend on. for survival in this world, our liver is actually responsible for removing all the toxins that end up in our body, and it does so through two different pathways. So there's the phase 1 and the phase 2. And how it works is the toxins come in, phase 1 pathways make them more water soluble, and then the phase 2 pathways hopefully achieve excreting them from the body. That doesn't always work though, because unfortunately there are elements we're exposed to that are just foreign to natural systems, and we aren't even able to excrete them. So they end up getting stored in our fat cells or in our bones or possibly in our brain. So, you know, really nasty stuff. But still, our cells do work overtime trying to detoxify all of these things. And incredibly, you know, here we are living healthy lives, hopefully mostly in a toxic world. I just left a list here of all the nutrients that are used in these pathways. You'll see it's quite extensive. So just for the phase 1, oxidation, reduction, hydrolysis, hydration, and dehalogenation, our bodies use up riboflavin, niacin, pyridoxine, folic acid, vitamin B12, glutathione, branched chain amino acids, flavonoids, and phospholipids. And if you know what any of those are, kudos. Phase 2 then uses up for the other reactions, glycine, taurine, glutamine, N-acetylcysteine, cysteine, and methionine, which are amino acids. And then, you know, all the toxins get excreted. So imagine how hard it is for our bodies to maintain these levels and to constantly be pumping in these nutrients to always be excreting toxins. A word we don't often hear about is xenobiotics. And what that means is basically what I've been referring to as toxins. They are elements that are foreign to natural systems. So we come into contact with them because they've been synthesized. So they could be plastics, pesticides, some type of chemicals in the atmosphere. And xeno is really, it means that they're foreign to us. So biological systems don't always know how to handle them. And sometimes that can lead to disease when we're exposed to them over the long term. So in the environment, xenobiotics would include, like I said, synthetic pesticides, herbicides, and industrial pollutants that would not be found in nature. So now we're getting into why organic is important for health, because as most of you, I hope, or probably know, organic agriculture is founded on the basis of using less harmful means to achieve good agricultural goals. So we're feeding the soil, we're tending to the health of the soil to promote good, soil life and healthy plant life without the use of agrochemicals or xenobiotics that could harm our life, soil life, and plant life. Xenobiotics are by definition foreign to life, and as our cells attempt to detoxify them, they sometimes become even more toxic during phase 2 conjugation reactions, because our biology is not designed to handle these man-made poisons, and their metabolism causes stress to our biochemistry. And they cause imbalance and illness. So every step along the way, like I just showed, our detoxification pathways depend on critical cofactors that integrate key vitamins and minerals. And when our detoxification pathways work overtime, there's an increased risk in depletion of these critical cofactors, which included the vitamins, the amino acids that we saw previously. Because detoxification is prioritized, other biochemical processes that depend on these cofactors may become impaired. And that is key, because a lot of those cofactors are very important in other areas besides detoxification. But when we're constantly working overtime to detoxify, it takes a toll on other systems. These processes include hormone and neurotransmitter synthesis, gene regulation, energy metabolism, cellular division, and many, many more. So remember in the first part where I spoke about quality of life, it's very difficult to have a good quality of life when the very building blocks that we need for proper gene regulation, to have neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin that regulate our mood, hormones, energy, all of that is sort of being thrown off balance by these xenobiotics or chemical invaders in our body. I also want to take a deep dive and look a little bit at glyphosate, because it is the most widely used agrochemical in the world, in the history of the world. And it's so pervasive because of how heavily it is used in not only genetically modified Roundup ready type crops, but also as a desiccant, which means that when many grains and pulses are grown conventionally in large scale agricultural operations, glyphosate or other herbicides, but often glyphosate, can be used as desiccants, which means that the whole crop is sprayed killing the crop and drying it out, and then it's harvested and then it's sold to us and then we eat it. So why looking at glyphosate? Well, it's everywhere, and it's not the only chemical, it's not the only agrochemical, but it is so pervasive that I think it deserves its own little section here. This is the molecule, and for those of you who know, I'll just quickly go through this because I already said it. Those of you who know about glyphosate might know that it is similar to an amino acid, which I'll touch on in a minute, but I just wanted to point out that excessive use of glyphosate has resulted in resistant weeds and a resurgence in the use of herbicides like 2,4-D, dicamba, and paraquat. And why that's important is because glyphosate was actually originally touted as the safer alternative to those, which are even more dangerous. So we're actually discussing here one of the herbicides, which is allegedly one of the safer ones. Why it is problematic. Number one, we hear a lot about the importance of a healthy microbiome, both in the gut and in the soil. They're both key to good health for humans, for animals, for plant life. You know, the microbiome, the bacteria, the friendly bacteria are just key components to a healthy system. And glyphosate is actually a registered antibiotic. So how that works is that glyphosate inhibits a pathway called the shikimate pathway. It's how it actually kills plants because they also depend on that pathway, but it affects bacteria. And so what happens is that the bacteria that are exposed to glyphosate, this biochemical pathway ends up being blocked, and shikimate is no longer transformed into charismate, which is a building block of many different key amino acids and neurotransmitters and vitamins. And it's not, you know, they're very critical things to our health. And so it's really not good when the bacteria that are in our gut that we depend on to make those critical components of health are being disrupted. It means that there's less phenylalanine, tyrosine, tryptophan, folate, vitamin K, and correspondingly dopamine, epinephrine, serotonin, and thyroid hormone, which are produced in our gut by those bacteria because they are being interfered with by glyphosate. And you can see those neurotransmitters at the bottom, dopamine, epinephrine, serotonin, thyroid hormone. They're also very important not only to physical health, but mental health, which really is an aspect of physical health. So it can lead to many different disorders that affect mood and different types of hormonal dysregulation as well. So it is also potentially a glycine analog. Glyphosate, the molecule is very similar to glycine, which is an amino acid and a building block in many proteins, very heavily present, for example, in collagen, which is in all of our connective tissues. And glyphosate is thought by some researchers to act as a glycine analog. More research actually needs to be done in this area, but there's very good evidence pointing to this being the case. So basically what would potentially happen is that as bacteria or cells in our body are trying to synthesize proteins, instead of taking up glycine, they're taking up glyphosate. And when that gets incorporated into a protein, especially like a collagen type protein where there's a lot of coiling and it really depends on the amino acids having the right configuration, this phosphate group that you see on the left in red, which replaces the hydrogen, is actually really messing things up because it can make the site more polar, more hydrophilic, and just mess up the whole coiling. And proteins that we depend on for the structure of our body and also just for enzymes could stop working properly. And that could be anywhere in the body because proteins are obviously a key component and building block in every cell. So that is of serious concern and deserves a closer look. Also, glyphosate is an endocrine disruptor, which means that it can mimic a hormonal activity at very low levels. It has been shown to have a very strong epigenetic influence on human cell lines. It causes hypomethylation and altered gene expression on DNA, which means that it can actually alter the way that our genes are being expressed. Epigenetics is very interesting because it was previously thought that we are our genes, but really we're our genes plus gene expression. So if we can alter how genes are expressed, that can have a serious impact on people's health. A recent study from France found that normal human breast cancer human breast cells switched over to aggressive breast cancer cells when they were exposed to glyphosate levels at below 2 parts per trillion. That's very low. So just to put that in perspective, 1 part per trillion is equal to 1 grain of sand in an Olympic swimming pool. Okay, so picture 2 grains of sand of glyphosate in that pool, and that's enough to trigger aggressive breast cancer cell growth. Glyphosate is also a chelator, so it acts to bind metals, and this can be a problem, especially when it comes to essential minerals that we need for our health, but also binding heavy metals in the soil. This has become a problem in Sri Lanka, where we source most all of our products, except for some spices from India. We work with a lot of farmers in Sri Lanka who really depend on their land being pure and pristine, and luckily have been able to keep it that way over the years, which is such a great national treasure in Sri Lanka. And there are also other areas in the country where they have converted over to agrochemical intensive agriculture, where they're heavily dependent on glyphosate, especially in rice and tea production when it's not organic. And what they've noticed in those communities is that glyphosate is leaching into well water, binding heavy metals, and has likely been the cause of a kidney disease epidemic that's claiming many lives because of its action as a chelator, binding those heavy metals and then bringing them up out of the ground. So really can mess things up. And sadly, glyphosate is one of only hundreds of approved agrochemicals that are being sprayed on non-organic food and, are just pervasive everywhere in the environment. And like I said, it was touted as the safe alternative, which is why it's so widely used. So given what we now know and have yet to learn about human health, genetics, epigenetics, it is inconceivable that we could create healthy societies so long as we continue to feed the world with poisons. Many studies have shown a direct correlation between the agricultural use of glyphosate and other pesticides and negative health outcomes ranging from autoimmunity to cancer, with everything in between. Good health and well-being are achievable goals, but only if we act now to reduce the toxic burden of modern industrial agriculture and return to the organic methods that we successfully practiced for thousands of years. And I just want to close by saying that choosing organic, to me anyways, really is choosing health. It's choosing a system of agriculture that respects nature and life and allows it to thrive without the use of harmful agrochemicals that could throw all the living systems off balance. And I think that when you look at it really big picture again, organic agriculture is a solution to so many of our world's problems, the environmental crisis, the health crisis. But larger than that, I would say that non-organic agriculture or chemical-dependent agriculture isn't even so much a problem as much as it is itself a symptom of a bigger problem, which is just the way that we approach nature and life in this day and age. Many people, I think, have sort of been fooled into thinking that we can know everything, that we can ever seek to fully know or control life or nature. And I think that in that folly, we have made many mistakes, and the imbalances that have accumulated over the years are catching up to us. So, we can also see that as an opportunity in 2020 to recognize that and take a step back and bring back some of those more ancient methodologies that respect land, that respect life, and bring back, I think, a higher state of health, which is achievable because life is incredibly resilient, as are we. So that pretty much sums it up, and I would welcome any questions.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Maurice. That was extremely informative. And I like how you can actually simplify all of the science of it and really break it down in regards to why organic is important. So we do have a time now for about a half hour worth of questions. So just if you could write your questions down in the question chat area. And we do have one comment from Marissa. Grateful to have your insight and knowledge, Maurice, which is the first one. Maybe while I wait for some questions to roll in, I'll just make some comments on things that I was kind of excited about. Is the whole idea of, well, this I have not heard of before, like glyphosate as a chelator. Am I saying that correct?
Yeah, chelator.
Can you just speak to that just a little bit further? Because that's fascinating to me.
Well, that is actually fascinating, and I didn't touch on this, but glyphosate originally was used as a chelator. So From what I understand, in the history of glyphosate, it was first used to treat corrosive metal like pipes. So where there was corrosion on pipes, it was an industrial chemical, and it was being used to sort of bind the metal on the pipes and fix the corrosion. So its main action actually is originally as a chelator, which means it's a chemical that's able to bind metals. Metals have a charge, so chelators will have the opposing charge and be able to go in and like bind to that metal and hold on to it, much in the same way that hemoglobin transports iron, through the blood. So that's a molecule that binds to iron, which we need to transport iron through the blood for oxygen. In much the same way, glyphosate chelates many different types of metals, including heavy metals, and including also essential minerals that we need to be healthy. So what in the history of glyphosate, what ended up happening was that it was discovered that when this toxic chemical that they were using to clean corroded pipes was spilled on the ground, it also killed all the plant life. And so in the brilliance of how yes, people looked at it then, they said, well, look at that, it kills all the plants, we could use it as a herbicide too. So yeah, it originally was used as a chelator.
Interesting. And so it's really only been around being used as an agrochemical since about 1950s, or do you have any knowledge on that?
I think it's around that time. I don't actually have the timeline in front of me, but it is one of the more recent ones. It's interesting to note, though, the similarity between glyphosate and defoliants like Agent Orange that have been used in chemical warfare. And really, these agrochemicals do come out of the same type of mentality and also industry as chemical weapons. So, from what I understand, when the Second World War kind of came to an end, there was a huge industry, and even, obviously Agent Orange was used later in Vietnam, but as this industry was kind of drying up in the chemical weapons, they were looking to other markets. So a lot of these weapons manufacturers just kind of turned to nature and started to declare war on nature as part of the Green Revolution, and promoted them as these great tools that farmers could use, when really the background of many of these chemical manufacturers was actually in chemical weapons.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we have another question for you. This is from Samir. Is washing or soaking fruit and produce that are not organic, does that help remove pesticides and toxins? And if so, for how long would you recommend washing the fruit and produce for?
To be honest, I don't have any studies on that I've seen. I believe washing is a good idea because you might remove some, but I think the bigger problem is the systemic contamination, especially with something like glyphosate. So it actually makes its way inside. There is a lot of evidence pointing to it potentially being a glycine analog, like I mentioned, which means that in the example, just use the example of a chickpea, which have been found to be heavily contaminated with glyphosate. So that's a legume, which means it's high in protein. And gosh, is chickpea a legume? I don't even know. Beans are legumes. I'm not sure how you classify chickpeas, but it might be something else. Anyways, but those beans, chickpeas, legumes, they are high in protein. So when that plant is growing, it's synthesizing protein in the bean or in the chickpea. And as it's being exposed to glyphosate, it's actually being taken up by cells, potentially in the form of glycine in the molecules, and being incorporated right into the proteins inside the cell. So it's actually making up like a key component of the proteins in the cell, and then by default in the chickpea. So chickpeas which are sprayed with glyphosate pre-harvest to desiccate them, you can't really wash it off because it's actually then been incorporated into the plant. And I suspect it to be the case with many chemicals, especially because they're not always hydrophilic, they're not always water soluble. Like a lot of pesticide or dangerous chemicals could also have like a more hydrophobic or non-water soluble aspect, that they could also make their way through cell membranes, sort of incorporate into the lipid portion, and then not be washed off just by water. I think it's, like I said, a good idea to wash vegetables and fruit, but I really don't think that that will remove the most dangerous pesticides, because they would have a way of making their way inside.
Mm-hmm. What about any sort of resources that you would, or excellent sites, websites, etc., that you would direct people to in regards to following up on this topic? I know that
The topic
like
was
Organic Center does a lot, but
yeah, the topic was pretty broad, but following up just on general health and natural health, there's so many great resources out there. So I think kind of take your pick, but if you want to learn more about Ayurveda, there's there's the Ayurvedic Institute in the United States. There's a lot of information. There's books online that you can order, and more in terms of sort of more the biochemical and the scientific aspect. When it comes to glyphosate, a great resource is actually an organization in the United States called Moms Across America that I really love. The woman who founded it, Zen Honeycutt, is incredible, and they have actually been responsible for initiating a lot of this conversation around glyphosate. They were the group that originally sent a lot of many different things, from foods to breast milks to like vaccines to tons of different things for testing for glyphosate, and found contamination and really got this conversation started. So they've got great resources on their website with a lot of the science on glyphosate specifically, and other factors that could affect your health. So that's Moms Across America. But of course there are so many, and CODA also has great resources to share. If anyone wants to know more, email Tia.
mm-hmm.
Or email me, and I'd be happy to share. Also, if there's any like scientific papers behind any of what I saw that you'd like to read, just feel free to email me and I could send them your way.
Great. Well, I'll just plug 2 more resources for people. The Organic Center does great research, and they have all their research available for free on their website, so check that out. It's based out of the US. And then FIBL is the Swiss Institute that does a lot of research on everything to do with organic that you can imagine, and extremely informative studies there across every spectrum that you want to know about organic. So
I mean, there's so much great science out there. You could just spend days reading about these things, and there's a lot of information, which is kind of also why I wanted to frame it in the bigger picture, because I think sometimes it can be challenging to go down every single pathway. And I think sometimes it's important to take a step back and say, well, what are we really after? Is it health? Then what we need is balance. And if we want balance, then we have to avoid chemical toxicants. And it's yes, you can go to all these studies and look into them, and they're all there, and there's a lot of good science to prove these things, which is important, especially when it comes to policy. But I also think it's important to just recognize that as much as we can avoid exposure to xenobiotics and chemical toxicants, then we can improve health.
Okay, we have a comment from Joanne. Thank you for this informative presentation and your commitment to people's health and well-being.
Thank you.
We have another comment from Heather. Does CHA support producers in transitioning to organic, or does the company reach out to already organic businesses or producers?
That's a good question. It is a challenge because there are a lot of farmers in transition going into organic who cannot sell under the organic system, but are still using the same methods. So, it's great if there are systems in place to be able to support those farmers as they transition to organic, to pay them a bit of a premium to help them out. Currently, because we carry only certified organic products in our line, we only buy from producers who are already certified organic. That being said, like I said, the nice thing about Sri Lanka is actually that there is land which is pristine, which has not been used for chemical intensive agriculture. So one of the really exciting new projects that we're involved with our sister organization that we founded in Sri Lanka, which is called Regenerative Organic Sri Lanka, is that we are actually looking not only to regenerate the land, but also the people, the farmers, the culture. And we are bringing farmers back in touch with the land to be able to grow organic crops. So we're working in some areas which have not really been used for agriculture, and in some villages where they, they might have a garden, a forest garden in the backyard, but they haven't been producing crops for, large-scale consumption or export. And so what we're doing is we're working with some specialists in organic agriculture to give training and empower those communities so that they can actually now start farming organically on pristine land without going through the whole transition period that many in-conversion farmers traditionally would need to go through.
Okay, great. We talk a lot about organic and the land and the air and the water, etc. What about the element of organic, where we do not permit preservatives and dyes and colorings, etc., in manufactured products? Can you speak to that element of organic out of manufactured products, and how does that tie into our digestive health?
It's so important, actually. Many people don't realize when you go through a list of ingredients and there's a lot of things you don't understand, your body doesn't understand them either. So when you're looking at all these additives that are being included in our food in the form of like coloring, preservatives, you know, much like the agrochemicals, they're synthetic xenobiotics that often our body doesn't recognize as food. And so it just sort of doesn't know what to do with it. And we have difficult time detoxifying from those things. So organic does protect the consumer not only from the pesticides used in growing the crops, the raw materials for foods, but also prevents there being any additives in the foods that could be harmful to your health. So I think it really goes together. For example, in Chaz Organics, we sell coconut milk. It's only 2 ingredients, organic coconut and purified water. And we've actually had it tested. Well, we had our coconut whipping cream tested, and we had it tested for 200 pesticides, including glyphosate. And I'm saying 200, it was I don't know. I have to look up the number. I think it was more, but it was hundreds. And you know, came back clean, nothing, 0 pesticides. So that's obviously important. But then on top of that, what we're also not doing is adding, you know, all these different additives like bleaches in the form of sulfites and gums and thickeners that could cause digestive issues. And beyond that, you know, just what we try to do is offer a really clean product that we, you know, where we achieve sort of the texture, the taste, the food safety and all that using the natural aspects of different foods and ingredients rather than turning to chemicals. Another example would be our canned fruits. We sell organic canned fruit, which is just canned in pineapple juice. So we avoid the use of sugar syrups, which are often genetically modified corn-based in conventional canned fruit. And instead, we just use the natural sugar from pineapple. We avoid using citric acid, which is often derived, again, from genetically modified corn. And instead, we use just the acidity from the pineapple juice. So we're able to sort of design with food chemistry in mind, similar, you know, foods with similar taste profile, safety profile in terms of food safety, but without the use of potentially harmful or genetically modified ingredients as additives or preservatives.
Great. Well, I'm glad you're touching on genetically engineered, because that was my next question. So we see a huge demand for there to be labeling of GMOs, etc. What can you say in regards to GMOs and health? Why is it that people are so concerned about GMOs, and why is it that labeling is in such demand in many European countries? It's now mandatory, of course, in the United States. That's debate in regards to how that's happening, but you know, there has been moves in Canada multiple times to label GMOs. What can you say about GMOs and digestive health?
I think that the main concern I have around GMOs is that they're very experimental. We are playing with nature and we're playing with genetics, which means that it affects all future generations. And we're putting these things out into nature where they can never really be taken back. So that is such an important thing to recognize. For example, you could go and spray glyphosate on your crop 1 year and then, you know, not spray for 3 more years and then clean up your land and kind of go back to normal. There's no going back to normal when it comes to genetically modified crops, because we are releasing genetically modified organisms into the world and you can't recall them after. You know, they're alive, so they can go and cross-pollinate or breed with other species and contaminate other crops. So that's, for me, issue number 1 is now we're playing with genetics, and that affects future, you know, the whole lineage of that plant line and down to future generations. We can't really take it back. Beyond that, the safety testing on genetically modified foods has been horrible. You know, our government approved many crops based on testing that, you know, when I went and looked into it, it was stuff that, you know, in university, if I had tried to hand that into a prof, they would have given me an F. Like, it's not real science, it's outdated, and it's just really, it's an embarrassment to science to say that there has been safety tests on genetically modified foods. When it comes to gut health, you know, the main concerns are, I think, with the BT corn, which incorporates a high level of BT in the corn, which is you can Bacillus thermogenesis. Did I get it right, Tia?
I don't know. You're on your own.
Anyways, it's a toxin that's produced by this species, and it actually has an action of like boring holes in the digestive system of insects, which is why it kills them. So obviously not a good thing to eat in high quantities. And well, then there's the Roundup Ready crops, which Roundup is a commercial name for a product which uses glyphosate. You know, glyphosate is the main component of Roundup. So what that means is that while Roundup or glyphosate kills most crops, when it comes to Roundup Ready corn, Roundup Ready soy, those crops are being sprayed with glyphosate to kill the weeds, and the crop survives, which means you can spray it with as much as you want, and you could spray it for the whole growing season, and then, you know, just package it up and sell it to people to eat. So it's containing obviously very high levels of glyphosate, which, as we know, is terrible for health. So those are the main concerns people have with genetically modified ingredients in food. And one of the great things about organic, obviously, is that we do not allow any genetically modified ingredients in organic foods. So when you're getting organic, you're also getting non-GMO. That's why I think labeling is a great idea. And, you know, definitely there should be warning labels on genetically modified foods, no doubt. But in the absence of that, it's, again, like all the more important to choose organic, because you know that when you're choosing organic, you are actually avoiding genetically modified ingredients.
Great. There's another question. What is your opinion on Carrageenan and Xanthic gum? Is it too specific, or do you have some knowledge?
Yeah, I have opinions on those. So in Carrageenan or Carrageenan, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. It's actually, I believe, from Irish moss seaweed. It has been shown to cause digestive issues and health issues, and it's an ingredient that we certainly avoid in all of our products. We don't use any kind of gums, including Carrageenan or xanthan. And you know, I think for people who have sensitive digestion, especially, those could be an issue. Xanthan also could be derived from genetically modified ingredients from corn. So I believe. So, you know, they're not ingredients that I would look to consume or put in our products. And I think that if the question is relating to where their place is in the organic standard, I'm not sure if that's the question. I know there's been a lot of debate. The Cornucopia Institute did a lot of work around trying to get Carrageenan out of the organic standard in the United States, I know. So I think that that is still a debate that is happening. Personally, I have not been involved in that, and I support their work. But I don't know any more than that. Other than that, it's probably an ingredient that I would personally avoid.
Great. Great. Well, any more questions coming in from our crowd? Can leave it a few more minutes here. I find it fascinating just to start thinking about it. And one time when I was asked to do a presentation on health at the Canadian Health Food Association, I presented with Dr. Andy Howemeister, and he showed a very interesting study, which was around farmers and of course their health. So looking at it from that area of like the work safety component of working amongst non-organic crops and the effects on their children, right? Yeah. And so it was very interesting to see how much research there is for children under 3 that are affected by pesticides. He actually showed graphs or like physical images of like the handwriting, and just it was like impossible to read between different communities of organic versus non-organic that were taught by the same school system. It's just fascinating to kind of look at how much it affects your brain.
It's huge, and especially going back to glyphosate, and obviously it's not the only one. They're all harmful, or you know, many are harmful at least. Glyphosate happens to cross the blood-brain barrier, from what I've understood. There's new research that shows that it affects fertility rates. It also affects autism rates. So health among us as consumers is obviously a key concern, but especially health among agricultural workers. And like I mentioned, the communities in Sri Lanka that are affected now by the kidney disease epidemic because of the well water being contaminated. I know there's communities in you know, you hear about areas where they're picking bananas that are conventional, and we know about that from fair trade, obviously, Tia, but where the planes would just pass overhead and dump pesticides on the workers. This type of thing happens, and then obviously it affects their children, and sometimes they would even be born with deformities in those areas. So it's so important to think not only about our health as consumers, but the health of the farmer who's working so hard to bring us our food. And I think that's one of the the things that really troubles me the most is that many farmers are still unaware of the danger, and they're being told, you know, there's a big push to, you know, use certain chemicals. You know, it helps you whatever, avoid weeds or improve your yields and all this. And I feel like farmers are being lied to a lot of the time, and the benefits are being hyped up and the dangers are downplayed. And that's affecting their health, their family's health, future generations' health. And like I showed with glyphosate, that has actually an epigenetic, it has an epigenetic impact. So that means that it actually affects DNA expression, and that epigenetic expression can actually be passed down through future generations. I think more research needs to be done on this, because there's incredible research on epigenetics now that shows that things that happen in lineages of, you know, from grandparents can affect grandchildren later in so many different ways, even with cognitive things. So something like glyphosate, which is shown to affect reproduction, which is shown to have an endocrine disrupting epigenetic effect. I wouldn't be surprised if it did affect not only like current generations, but future generations down the road, which is why it's so important that we act now to kind of like, you know, reverse all of this damage that's already been done, and bring ourselves back into balance when it comes to, you know, exposing ourselves to all of these chemicals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've talked a lot about human health. I was just thinking of a thing I saw on Facebook this morning. It was a horse drinking from a waterway, and a person drinking from the waterway, and it said, "Always trust the horse; they will not drink something that is toxic." Right? And I just thought, yeah, that's so fascinating, because you know, when I think of drift and pesticides being sprayed, you can't control it, and it does affect animals and wildlife.
Oh,
We
yeah.
have seen a lot of research come out of, I remember watching David Suzuki when I was a kid and seeing, you know, multiple genitalia on frogs, right? So it's very interesting to think about what the long-term effects is, not just on human health, but also on animals and wildlife.
And we're all connected, right? I mean, life, that's the thing, is it's a web of life. And I think that when we take a reductionist and mechanistic view, an approach to the world and to nature, it's flawed. And this is why we're in the mess that we're in now. We need to recognize that we are living systems that depend on the health of our gut microbiome. You know, we have a symbiotic relationship with the bacteria in our own body. And even some people may be surprised, virome, you know, we have a whole like colony of microorganisms living in our body that are a part of us, and we're a part of them, and we're a part of the ecosystem that we live in. You know, we tend to the land, and the land takes care of us. So we can't just throw things out there in a sort of single-minded mechanistic view of the world and think that it won't have an impact on the whole. And I really think it's time for us to recognize that and heal the ecosystems and heal our health at the same time. So
I know that we have the Organic Agriculture Centre of Canada tuned in right now. And I have to say that, you know, we always find it challenging to talk about the health benefits of organic food in relation to nutrient content. And there has been studies, certainly, and go to again to Organic Center's page, which does look at specific tests on, I remember one study was on apples, and they took a conventional non-organic apple and compared it to the nutrient content and like the vitamins, etc., of an organic, and eating one organic apple was the equivalent of eating 4 non-organic apples, right? We need more research of this nature, and we can never make these broad, massive claims in regards to like organic is XYZ, but I feel like we don't talk about enough the positive elements because we don't want to make sweeping comments. So the more that we can figure that out.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's great that they've done that research. But I mean, even if you think, you know, beyond that, just in terms of what something like glyphosate, which is an antibiotic, does to our gut bacteria, you can see that we need our gut bacteria to actually manufacture key nutrients that we depend on, that are building blocks for neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine, like I showed, that, you know, are essential to like blood clotting and whatnot. So we actually need those vitamins they are nutrients, but they're manufactured in our gut. And when we consume chemicals that harm our microbiome, even if there's nutrients in the food, you know, that doesn't mean that we're not destroying our gut microbiome and thereby limiting our own nutrient like uptake in our gut. So there's that whole part of it too that I really think deserves a closer look. But I agree, we need more research, and I think that's actually one of the main reasons why I didn't pursue an academic career. I actually loved doing research, and I was really excited about research. When I was doing nutritional science, I had some profs that said I was really good at research, and they're really pumping me up to go, pursue this academic pathway. But I realized early on that research needs to be funded, and there just wasn't anyone funding the research that I would have wanted to do. So, I don't know how to get around that. I don't know how to find the funding that we need to promote the good research, but I know there's great research out there. I know more and more of it is happening, which is great. And we just need more, we just need more science to shine a light on all of these things.
Yeah, it's great. There are a couple more questions that have come in. So yes, any of the research that I've discussed, feel free to just write us at info@canada-organic.ca, and I will be happy to share the information that I've spoken about, the multi-generational study. And there was a question here from Samir. Does pharmaceuticals play any part in the interaction between human health and glyphosate?
Probably. Again, more research is needed because there's probably a synergistic effect because of the way that it increases permeability in the blood-brain barrier. There's so much research needs to be done, but there's a lot of indicators that suggest that it probably is.
Okay, we have another question, which is, any knowledge or insight on coffee? Is organic always better than conventional? And I guess that's kind of the question, is in the way it's grown or for digestive health, or, that could be taken many ways. So you answer that as you feel.
Well, like with anything, if it's organic, it means that you're not going to be exposed to all the pesticide residues that are on most of the conventional crops. So by default, I would just say yes. But actually, Tia, you might know more about coffee than me, no?
Well, I can tell you from a worker perspective, you don't want people getting sprayed. And usually you would see coffee being grown in a shade-grown environment, which is forest. So you don't want to spray around forest life, right? Which will hurt the rest of the forest and the waterways. But as for studies that I've read in regards to, drinking organic versus non-organic coffees, I don't have that at my fingertips. But again, look in the organic center because you probably have something on this topic.
I mean, it's kind of like with tea though, because we're more in tea than coffee at Ches Organics. And, I remember being at one of our partners' facilities where they were drying the green leaf tea, and it was all kind of like, well, look, we just picked it and now we're drying it. I was like, oh, that's great. And then I said, well, what about like other tea that's not organic? If they've sprayed it with fungicide or anything, do they like wash it before they dry it? No. So, and then you're taking that and it's getting dried, and then you're like steeping it in water, right? So, I mean, for me, I think that would be healthy personally.
Yeah, actually, I just remembered a statistic because I used to work in fair trade, and every once in a while, fair trade and ourselves trade information. I believe that it was something like 70% of all the coffee coming into Canada on imports, which is Statistics Canada, is certified organic. So that's huge, right? Like, it's just, coffee was grown on lands that just didn't have a lot of access. There wasn't a huge need to use it in really high altitude. Why would you? It's not traditionally grown that way, but certainly because people want to intensify agriculture and do it in places that maybe isn't the best for coffee growing, they've had to adopt new techniques that would help to grow coffee in that way. So, I mean, I think clearly my feeling as well is that, if you can get it as organic, I think we've spoken a lot about the benefits of choosing organic over choosing something that has other implications that we need more long-term studies on too.
I mean, every time you're choosing organic, you're basically choosing something that has not been intentionally contaminated with potentially harmful xenobiotics in the form of agrochemicals. So it's sort of, it's just, you're stacking the odds in your favor every time you choose organic, because you can't go and analyze in a lab every single piece of food you're going to eat. But that when it's organic, it has to sort of abide by a certain standard where those harmful things are not being intentionally used on the crop. So you really
not just the standard, but the inspection, right?
Exactly. Yes, and it's regulated and it's inspected, and I know there's a lot of people who kind of question, well, is organic really great? And I've heard there's problems. And I would just say, well, there's problems potentially in every system, but yeah, it is very well regulated. And if there are problems, they're sort of few and far between. And really, if you look at the benefits to adhering to a system that prohibits the use of these harmful agents and that everyone's inspected for that, and there's so many checks and balances, again, you really are stacking the odds in your favor of good health when you choose those products over the ones where there's complete dysregulation and anything goes. And especially in other countries, products that are banned here are still allowed in other countries. So really, you have no idea what those foods are treated with.
Okay, I've got our last question from April, and it's a tough one. So we'll see if you are educated on this. Is there any new research about geoengineering and how it has affected the quality of organics?
Well, there's a lot of research on geoengineering. That would be a whole other topic. But certainly it can affect plant life because of the concern for contamination that would come in rainfall, specifically from heavy metals, and that can affect root systems, can acidify the soil. It's a huge concern, obviously, and as you know, the more there's sort of a debate on whether or not it's actually been deployed, but the more potential that there is for it to be deployed, which I do see evidence for, the more potential there is for it being harmful for farmers. So I really do think that as a community that stands for natural health and protecting farmers, it is important for us, again, like you said, Tia, we haven't always looked at health. That's another environmental factor that I've been looking into for many years that I have found lacking in the space that we sort of convene in natural health. And I think that it's important to look at because it's an environmental factor that could affect growers and our health and really everyone. And yeah, I think a lot more work needs to be done in that area too.
Great. Well, we have reached our time. I want to thank you so much, Maurice, for giving us your knowledge and taking the time out of your day. And I'd like to wrap up Organic Week webinars and wish everybody a wonderful weekend. So thanks very much, everyone. Take care.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Tia.